Chouchou, come here. Come on. Let's eat. Good job, Chouchou. And release the shoe. Boop. Good job. Nice chunky belly.
Can you guys even see Chouchou right now? I don't know if you can. He's right here, taking a nap. Chouchou has a cleft palate, and feeding a kitten with a cleft palate is a really unique challenge. Chouchou's case is very severe, so any food that goes into his mouth simultaneously goes up into his nasal cavity. So it's not an option for him to eat food orally. As a baby, I was doing tube feeding, and a tube is passed into his mouth down through his esophagus to have his formula go straight to his stomach. But as kittens get older, it becomes less of an option to do that because they have premolars that act almost as little scissors. Once their teeth come in on the side of their mouth, any tube that goes into their mouth can easily be bit, and that can cause them to swallow a tube and have an obstruction that is an emergency surgery. So I wanted to avoid that with him, and I wasn't sure exactly how this was going to work, but I have gone through several strategies here that I want to share with you if you happen to be in the same situation as me. And if not, it's still really interesting to see, the troubleshooting around all of this. Quick disclaimer, tube feeding can be absolutely deadly if you are not trained to do it, so please do not attempt tube feeding unless you have been specifically trained hands-on by a professional. So the first thing I had to do was figure out how can I pass a tube down his esophagus without his teeth closing over it. I tried a couple different things. I tried using part of a syringe at first, but the syringe is really hard and it can slip easily between his teeth. So my friend Igu, who is an awesome dentist and foster parent, had the idea to use dental tubing. You know when you go to the dentist and there's that little suction tube that you spit into? My friend had the idea to cut a section of that and use that as a bite guard. And it was a brilliant idea because this tubing is very firm. It has a little piece of metal throughout the center of it, but it also is soft enough that when he bites on it, it kind of holds in place. So we drilled a hole across that tube so that the tube can be bent around his head, and then I can pass the tube through it. And this strategy worked brilliantly for him. So I have his little meat smoothie in his tube, all the way through his tube. I have his tube measured, and I have a bite guard for him. What I do now is I pass this through the bite guard. This piece goes in his mouth, and then I'm able to pass this through safely without it being bit. And then we eat. And then I can pull this part out. Excuse me, you gotta drop that too. Thank you. And after a few days of this, he grew to love his little dental suction tube. Every time he sees it, he just opens his mouth and is like, feed me. That worked really well until he got a little bit bigger and he started to paw at the tube. So the challenge that I was having before was that when I was tube feeding him using his bite guard and, putting the tube through the bite guard, he was going a little berserk on the tube. Something that can happen is that when kittens are really, really excited about eating a bottle, they'll go like, ah, and attack the bottle while they're eating it. So he was doing that to the tube, which is super, super dangerous because he could pull his tube out while it is in there. So what did I do? This is an adjustable e-collar. So it's like something you put around a cat or dog's head after surgery, but it's got this nice little adjustable thing here. So what I'm doing is I'm kind of using it in reverse. I have it sort of turned the other way, and I pop his head through. Hello. And then I tighten it, not so tight, but just tight enough that he can't put I know, he's so excited to eat. He knows. So now that he's in his little e-collar, I can use this bite guard. I put the tube through the bite guard, and you'll see how excited he is. He opens his mouth right up, and he's like, let's go, let's eat. And now I can tube feed him without any issues. All right, you ready? Here we go. He's so happy. This method has changed everything. I am able to not be distracted by his paws. I just am focusing on making sure that the tube is properly placed, making sure that it's not moving around in there, making sure the bite guard stays in place. And that's it. And then I just pull the tube out, pull the bite guard out, and you're free. Woohoo! You ate. You did a good job.
A boom, a bang, I had my snack. I ain't gotta worry about jiggity jack. I said a boom, boom, bang, I had my snack and I don't gotta worry about jiggity jack. Yeah! Mwah.
He finally hit 1 pound. Yay! As far as the contents of his diet, he was obviously on a kitten formula as a baby. And then as he gets to weaning age, around 5 weeks, I was like, okay, I can't just give him formula that's not formulated for a kitten who is now growing into that next phase, but he needed to have something that's liquid. So what I was doing at first was I was giving him some canned food mixed with water and a little bit of formula, and I was using a magic bullet blender to really just make it very, very smooth so that it could go through a tube. The problem was that the size of tube that I was using still was having a hard time passing through that thicker food that I was trying to give him. And if I wanted to add enough water to make it easier to pass through, then it was not going to be calorically dense enough to be able to feed him. So there's all these different factors at play. This is why it's pretty complicated to do tube feeding, because you're not just thinking about safely placing the tube, making sure that you're not aspirating them, making sure that, you know, they're not biting the tube, but you're also having to think about being in charge of all of the nutrition that they receive. So you have to do this complicated math to determine, you know, their calorie requirement for the day, to determine how many milliliters their stomach capacity is and how often to feed them. It's complicated, and as he was weaning, it became even more complicated. Something that did happen that was a real frustration was that I was trying to feed him the new food with the blended wet food. And an idea that was presented to me was to increase the size of his tube. So he was having a smaller tube called a 5 French. I moved him to a bigger tube called an 8 French. And what happened when I moved him to the bigger tube is it has a larger hole on the end of it. And as I was pulling the tube out, what happened was a little tiny bit of that slurry ended up touching his tongue as it was coming out. And the results of that were just horrible. Just this little half drop touching his tongue ended up, you know, having that food go up into his nasal cavity, and for 72 hours, this kitten struggled trying to work that out of his nose. It was very upsetting. My veterinarian recommended starting him on an antibiotic because we didn't want it to develop into an infection up there, but giving him even an antibiotic is hard because he can't get anything orally. So we did an injectable antibiotic for him, and then I just did saline nasal washes as well as nebulizer treatment for him. So he was getting nebulizer, he was, oh hi Coco. Oh my gosh, she's saying hi to him. That's very sweet. Coco's not a big fan of kittens, but Chouchou's not really a kitten. He's more like a dandelion puff or like a little cloud. So he was receiving saline nasal flushes where I basically would just tilt his head back and drop saline into his nose. And then he was also receiving nebulizer treatment. And you know what? I was really worried that this was just going to become the new thing. He was just going to have this nasal irritation. But 72 hours after starting the antibiotic and doing those nasal flushes, he did get completely better, and thank goodness. But obviously I switched back to the smaller tube size, but I couldn't feed him the slurry through the smaller tube, so I was like, okay, what do I do here? So complicated. What we ended up doing was switching him onto a veterinary prescription diet that is designed for adult cats, but that is a liquid. So it's called Emerade, and it is a really calorie dense diet that is appropriate for his needs, but that can be given in that smaller tube. Very, very complicated stuff, but we're doing it and it's working and he's so healthy, and thank goodness we've only had that one little tiny hiccup and now he is eligible to get an E-tube. That's where we're at. This is how I feed him. It's very, very strange, but thank goodness that I've figured out a way to make this all work for him. There he is. He wasn't very exciting for this video because he pretty much slept the whole time. I hope that this was interesting to you guys, and stay tuned for more about Chouchou and all of his future prospects for surgery. Really right now, the big thing is getting that E-tube inserted, making sure that he is able to get nutrition until he is a big enough age for surgery for his cleft palate repair. Stay tuned, I will share more in the future. Well, you guys, Chouchou went in for his E-tube and unfortunately it did not go as I had hoped. He's okay, but we had to remove the E-tube after just a couple of days. E-tubes are typically well tolerated and they are a life-saving option for providing nutrition to cats who can't or won't eat. But unfortunately with Chouchou, he is a really unique case and he's a really small guy, and we just did not have a positive experience with his specific case and an E-tube. During the 4 days that he had it, he experienced nausea, reflux, severe nasal discharge, weight loss, and most frighteningly, he vomited, which is really scary for a kitten with such a severe cleft palate. I worked so hard to manage all of it. I stayed by his side 24/7. I even slept on the nursery floor with him for 5 nights straight. Ultimately, with everything we tried, we weren't able to get it to work for him, and it was decided to remove the E-tube. I've gone back to that initial method, and within just a few feedings, he started to bounce back. Now it's been many days and he is doing phenomenally well. He is playing, he's happy, and he's running into my lap, purring, waiting for his meals in the way that he knows. He loves eating this way. And yeah, maybe it's a little bit weird and maybe it's a little bit different, but you know what? If it works for him, it works for me. And right now, this is working well for both of us.